All right, well, officially, bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. Hi, everyone. Welcome online or in person to Concordia University's fourth space. Thanks so much for joining us for shaping a more inclusive media landscape, how journalism can do better. Big welcome to the panelists, the audience members, and organizers who are joining us here today. So just to help get you situated, I'll let you know that we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space. Fourth Space is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Jagé, Montreal, and we'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanyankahawga Nation, for the caretakers for the lands and waters we're meeting on, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. If you're new to Fourth Space, welcome in once again. What do we do here? Well, we work with our university community to help mobilize and exchange knowledge by co-creating and producing daily activities. And so today it's our pleasure to welcome in all of you and our collaborators from journalism as well, who I'll pass it to in just a second. I'll just let you know, for those of you online, if you'd like to jump in with questions and comments, while the panel conversation is happening, you're more than welcome to do so by turning on your camera, raising a hand, and we'll call on you, or of course the chat is activated. Joining us in person and you'd like to jump in, just raise a hand and we'll pass the mic to you. This is a two-part event, so there's going to be a panel to start with, followed by a bit of a workshop, which is going to happen here in person. And so we will keep the Zoom going because we're all going to come back for a debrief afterwards, but the organizers will tell you more about it. So it's now my pleasure to pass the floor to our journalism collaborators here from Concordia University, Magda Konieczna and Christy Snell, who will tell you more about the conversation and workshop we're about to embark on. Welcome.
Hi, welcome to this discussion that we're calling Shaping a More Inclusive Media Landscape, How Journalism Can Do Better. I'll begin by mentioning that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanyankahawga Nation. We're gathered here today with respect and gratitude and a deep commitment to learning and understanding.
And hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Magda Konieczna. I'm an associate professor of journalism at Concordia University. And this is my colleague, Christy Snell, who's been doing the morning radio newscasts on CBC Montreal for the last 14 years. If you recognized her voice, that would be why. And she's on a year-long leave from the CBC to be the journalist in residence at Concordia and to lead our Institute for Inclusive, Investigative, and Innovative Journalism, which is so many I's that I always have to look up what order those go in.
And this is Magda Konieczna, of course, Associate Professor, Department of Journalism. Today's workshop comes out of a lot of work that we've been doing in the department. Our aim is to spend the first half hour or so hearing from the experts in journalism and in communities, about how inclusive journalism is practiced and how it could be. Then we'll be splitting into groups in different corners of the room to brainstorm how journalism can do better. Each group will be given a main theme question with a series of sub-questions, and those are designed to help come back with some recommendations. And then we'll come back together to hear the recommendations and discuss some next steps.
And I just wanted to reiterate again how happy I am that all of you guys are here. When we started planning this, I wasn't sure how many folks were going to come, what was going to happen. So really stoked to see everybody in the audience. So I'm going to introduce each of the panelists. We're going to have each of them talk for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to head into the breakout rooms. So we'll start with Nantali. And Nantali Ndongo is host of the CBC Montreal Provincial Arts and Culture Program, The Bridge. And she's also produced the award-winning 2016 multi-platform series called Real Talk on Race, and is filled in as a host on national CBC radio and on CBC music programs. And she recently produced an internal 5-episode podcast series about inclusive work in journalism, which I hope will one day be external so we can all listen to it. And for 17 years, she was MC and vocalist in the hip hop band Nomadic Massive. So I'll hand it over to you, Nantali. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Magda. Thanks, Christy. Thanks to you all. This is a fun experience because I'm technically on a 2-week vacation. And Christy wrote to me and I said, should I do this when I'm off? And I said, yeah, I need to do this when I'm off. I don't think that inclusive work is my favorite work, but I'm extremely committed to doing that work. But it's very messy work, and particularly messy when you work inside a colonial institution as large as the CBC, and then add on top of it to be at the CBC Montreal newsroom in the Quebec media landscape. So that would give you sort of the context of how messy things can get. I started at CBC in 2010, thanks to music, actually. I was a guest on Radio Noon. I was a musical guest on Radio Noon, and they happened to be doing a remote at Champlain College during an election. They wanted to get the input of young people, so the youth wing of all the political parties, their representatives were on this panel talking about education. I happened to be working in education at that time, doing a lot of grassroots work in high schools across the province around hip-hop education. And the host at the time asked me a question, and I gave a very real, lived, experienced answer. And then I got a call a couple months later from the producer of that show, who I guess finally did look at my CV. I wasn't looking for a job at CBC at the time, but that producer, I guess, realized that I had a background in journalism. I did a postgrad at Humber College in Toronto after doing a university degree at the University of Ottawa. And so that's kind of how I got in. And from the moment that I got in, my work was about inclusion without me naming it as such, just because as a Black Anglophone Montrealer, I think that's just a part of how I live all the time, sort of to kind of elbow my way through certain spaces that don't usually want to include people like me or people with some of my lived experience. So I came into CBC producing a series for all the platforms called Beyond Franglais. And it had everything to do with the fact that I was working in schools and interacting with kids who were speaking more than just English and French, and they were mixing up the languages. And what did that look like in the schools, with their parents, in their communities? So that was a series that I started with. And I got called in to continue working at the CBC, and I think I kind of challenged the space a little bit when I got there, because I realized that, at least with regards to Black representation, at the time, there was maybe a kind of, I don't know, mafia of Black representation. So some people had a sort of hold on who got to speak or who spoke, and it was a very limited number of voices, which told me that the CBC Montreal newsroom just wasn't aware of who was really out there. And that's just sort of been my goal, has been to just kind of constantly bring other voices to the table. It started with that in 2010, and just kind of continued with that in every approach to the work that I'm doing at CBC. So the daily work in terms of the content, some of the other work, which is between colleagues, trying to open up people's minds to new ideas. And it's not actually new ideas. It feels new, but it's actually ideas that people have been avoiding. And I think that's when I say inclusive work is messy, it's because inclusive work actually means that, one, we're going to have to say that the journalism that we practice in a traditional mainstream institution like the CBC is colonized journalism. And therefore, the work towards inclusion has to decolonize all of that. And that's very hard for people to deal with in an institution as big as CBC in particular, and also people who understand journalism to be one thing and practice in a particular way, and addressing who they think is their audience. So that work is nonstop, and I appreciate doing the work that I'm doing with my show, because it actually helps me bring that sort of pressure down to a very small contribution that I actually think can make a stronger impact. because I can every week talk to people who have different stories, who have different experiences, who aren't usually the Canadian Anglophone artists or cultural workers that we would usually hear from, who now can kind of be in the space and, with the way the show is designed, talk about more things than just their art and just culture. And to me, that's my way of like contributing to like I guess it's a gentle sort of push towards more inclusion. Although I think that the push has to be nonstop and coming from all angles, and sometimes requires stronger kicks than just gentle pushes. Yeah, I think that's about all that I wanted to share.
We're so happy to have you while you're on vacation. I just remembered that I had emailed you and it bounced back and I was like, oh no. So thanks for joining us. Okay, next we'll hear from Naguset, who is the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal. She's Cree from Lac La Ronge, Saskatchewan, but was taken during the 60s scoop and adopted by a Jewish family in Montreal. And she draws upon that experience in her advocacy work for Indigenous children in care. Naguset is working to develop a housing project featuring a social pediatric center for Indigenous children. And she has 3 beautiful boys and is dedicated to improving the lives of urban Indigenous people. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. So nice to see you. And you, Christy, thank you for inviting me. So I am just someone who works in the community. I'm not in media at all, but I sure do get a lot of requests to be on media. And I literally walk down the street sometimes and people are like, oh, I see you on TV. And I'm like, yeah, but it's never for a good reason. Because the work that I do, I've been working at the Native Women's Shelter since 1999. And our community has so many obstacles against us. So when I started working at the shelter, basically I'm trying to, every obstacle that we face, I try to find a way to get through it. And sometimes the media is there when that happens. And then there's another obstacle. So it's never for a good reason. It's always like, oh, someone passed away at Cabot Square, or it's missing and murdered, or it's youth protection issues, or it could be so many different things, right? And I remember a long time ago, this woman who now works for the Secretariat des Affaires Autochtones, but I think they changed their name now. But anyways, the provincial Indigenous Affairs. Her name is Alana Boileau. She's a lovely lady that I really appreciate working with. But back in the day, she worked for Quebec Native Women as the justice coordinator. And she said that the media only likes to choose Indigenous issues. They call it the 4Ds. So when we're drumming, when we're demonstrating, when we're dancing, or when we're dead. Otherwise, we're not interested. We're not interesting. I don't know if much has changed since then, because usually if you look at the stories, they're usually sad stories. Like on occasion, some of the happier stories that they've interviewed me about is when I do like National Indigenous Peoples Day. Does everyone know when that is? Can you please tell me? Say it? No. September 30th. Anyone else? Thank you, June 21st. Like everyone should know that this is the day the government we're supposed to celebrate Indigenous people, and yet people don't even know about it. Anyway, I'll just say I do something on that day at Cabot Square. I'm working with Pop Montreal. They give me all the money. I choose all the people to sing, and the people celebrate, and it's nice. It's weird that the government decided that September 30th should be a holiday because it's Truth and Reconciliation Day, which is basically acknowledging residential schools. And there's nothing fun about residential schools. Why would you wanna, sort of celebrate our traumas? But that's another podcast or whatever. Panel, sorry. Anyways, that's just who I am. And, I have some opinions. And if anybody wants to sit in my group, that's fantastic. And if you want to go sit with Nantali, I totally understand that. Moving on.
Thank you so much. And next we'll hear from Stephen Laperrière, who is General Manager of RAPLEAK, an organization that supports and promotes the rights of people with disabilities. He's the author of several books, including La Ville Handicapée, and he also did the French adaptation of the Guide on Accommodation Measures for People with Disabilities from the Canadian Institute of Arbitration and Mediation. He works to ensure that everyone, regardless of their disability, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. Thanks for being with us, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Magda. Thank you, Christy, and everyone for having me here. Me and Nankuset, we share the same sort of problems at times. Medias have a different look at handicapped persons when they dare to look at them. First off, they look at them in a very stereotypical type of way, and handicap is not a sexy topic. It doesn't sell, but the realities are there, the challenges are there, and there's little attention paid to those situations. This lack of representation also reinforces negative stereotypes, as I was saying, and stigmas, but also prevents non-disabled viewers or readers from gaining a full understanding of their experiences and perspectives of handicapped person. We would certainly like to see in the media more journalists, more reporters that are handicapped. We would like to see that because it would bring a different perspective. We would also like to see more newsroom and free of physical barriers to make sure that handicapped reporters, journalists, and staff and executives can be part of the newsroom, because having handicapped executives in any type of media is a plus in order to change the perspective. And we would like to see, obviously, more reporting on disabled related issues, but a more sensible reporting, in the sense not to be. We would like to see the news being more sensitive about issues instead of being more sensationalist. And we see a big difference in French media versus English media. English media cover more the related issues, the disabled related issues, than the French media. And when they do so, they are more sensitive about it. Is it a cultural thing? Is it because they have more means, a larger, wider audience? It could be a part of the problem, but we've noticed it many times. And issues that should interest everyone. We did an exercise a year and a half ago about mammograms for handicapped women. English media covered it real fine. French media, nothing. So there's quite a difference between French and English media. And like I said, to conclude this brief presentation, we would like to see media organizations have a responsibility to ensure that their coverage of disability-related issues is inclusive, because handicap, you have white persons, you have Black persons, you have indigenous people that are handicapped too. So it's part of everything. And to be more accurate and sensitive, stop being so sensationalist about it and be accurate about the facts. And by doing that and having more disabled journalists, editors, and a will to prioritize disability-related stories and news, we will start moving forward with everything. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Next, we'll hear from Leila Savage, editor-in-chief of La Converse. She's a Calderaj Roma from Serbia, was pushed towards journalism by the misrepresentation of her people in the media. She works to serve marginalized communities using dialogue journalism and teaching reporters from those communities through the Converse School. She also launched a pop-up media project during the pandemic where Roma journalists debunked fake news in Romani language. So welcome, Leila.
Hi. Well, thank you. I think I had a couple of slides. Okay. So I thought that the topic that I was asked to talk about today, how is my work inclusive journalism, was quite funny to me in a sense, because I don't believe that I'm doing inclusive journalism, or none of us here are doing inclusive journalism. I think we're just doing journalism as it should be done. So I actually believe that journalism can be a tool of change. And I want us to think about a little bit about how does it look like today? We can move on. So what is journalism, right? Very often journalism, I think similar to what Nakas had pointed out, is distractive, is trauma porn, it's dehumanizing, it's creating divides, and it's fast food journalism, as I call it, right? Give me a story, by the end of the day, I'm gonna parachute myself in a community and I'm gonna tell you what happened. This lack of transparency, rapid news cycles, lack of nuance, and lack of diversity has broken the trust of many people of color and many other traditional marginalized communities that now turn to alternative sources of media and very often fake news. This kind of coverage is harmful, right? How can journalism be different? I do believe that journalism that is sharing stories, that is doing storytelling, that is really amplifying the voices and questioning power sounds quite activist, right? But it is what journalism is supposed to be. It's a service. It can be a service. And I think that this is what it should be. I want to quote a panel of a few women of color I had met at ONA conference, and they were talking about how it was a panel on misinformation. One woman said, stereotypes are misinformation, and then our existence is combating it. So I do believe that media have the power to combat misinformation about our people. And it's really interesting to think about how can journalism be seen as a service. The moment we do that, it changes the way that our relationship, it changes our relationship to journalism. So journalism as a service, what does it look like? Well, it's community powered, it's relationship based, it's solution oriented, and it's trauma informed. Big words, what does it mean? Basically, it means community powers. Basically, our stories come from the needs of the community. So we'll be asking people what their concerns are, and then based on that, we'll be listening and we'll be reporting. Relationship-based means that we have to show up consistently and not just when things are bad. So, really building a relationship with people and being mindful of what kind of portrayals we're doing about the communities we're serving. Solutions-oriented, well, we have to serve the people that we report with, and I say with, not about. So thinking about what can they gain out of the story that we're doing. And then trauma-informed, similar, well, we're gonna make sure that stories don't cause more harm to the people that we're talking to. So like, as a journalist, think about, are you only going there to confirm your biases? What about this interview is triggering the people that you're talking to? And think about the amount of trauma that you're causing to the people that you're talking to. This kind of journalism is indeed emerging, and there are plenty of other media outlets that are doing this, mostly in the United States, led by people of color. And I would encourage you to follow them as well, but we could talk about that later. So basically, this is our team and some of our former members, and our mission is to represent and serve marginalized communities through dialogue journalism and build bridges and be a space of social change. I think that when you have a media that, such as ours and others, that center liberation, equity, and justice for minorities at the heart of their existence, and rather than diversity and inclusions as a statement or a DI training, it definitely changes the way that the news and the journalism is being done. So these are 4 questions that I ask my team before we write a story. If they can't answer those questions, we are not doing the story. So basically, it's why am I doing the story? Who does it serve? How will it serve and help the people living the situations? And what are my limitations? How can I surpass them? I think that these are questions that all journalists should ask themselves before they write any story. Unfortunately, it's not currently the case, but I encourage you to copy them. Just give us the credit. Next. I really like this thing that Connie Walker, a famous Indigenous reporter in Canada, said, storytelling rather than story taking, and it's something that I really take to heart. And so basically what it means is that you're really taking the time to share the stories that matter to the people rather than take the stories, as I said before, and just parachute yourselves in it. So at La Converse, we do listening sessions with some communities. And so basically we're really thinking about we have anti-oppressive editors we sometimes hire to review our work, making sure that we're not causing more harm. I actually think that who writes the story matters. It's a big debate in media, I know, but I actually think it's really important to think about who's writing the story, from whose perspective are they coming from. We do slow journalism. That doesn't mean that we're just purposely slow. It means that we're actually taking the time to speak to people, to understand it, to think about what our work could generate. And then finally, we think of our work throughout our entire team, but as well as in our reporting through a race, class, gender approach, because I think it's a really important intersection that should be taken more seriously in the Canadian landscape. So I'll just go quickly on some of our stories. I won't be able to go through all of them, but I'll start with the first one we ever wrote, which was written by reporter Takwa Swisi. This was Nourrir pour Réunir, so it's Ramadan, so great time to talk about it. Essentially, she wrote a story talking about the initiatives of care that were happening during the Ramadan, and this story featured mostly, there was other people, the main character, if you'd like, was Sister Sabria, and Sister Sabria is doing excellent work, really admirable work here in Montreal. She just feeds people all the time. And so Takwa just humanized her. And a French-Canadian white man showed up to her door, and so she was like, yeah, what do you want? You want food, right? And he was like, no, I just want to support you because I read about you at La Converse and you reminded me of Mother Teresa. So, that's another conversation. But he gave her $60,000. And I hope that every single person we talk about gets $60,000. But I think it's the kind of stories where just taking the time to humanize people can actually be a great tool of change. And then I think we've done it with other communities. So these are two more examples, but I don't have time to get into them now. So yeah, we can move on. One thing that I think should be done when we're talking about this kind of journalism is I call it celebrating the hood. So we have a series now called Hood Heroes, where we profile just regular folks that come from the hood and are changing things in their neighborhoods and are reinvesting in the youth. And this actually comes from a few conversations we had with youth. As you know, there's a lot of gun violence in Montreal, and a lot of youth were like, what do you want us to do? And it's not the sexy story about where the guns come from, because we all know where they come from. And what the youth want, the people that are concerned by this, is not the investigative story. They just want people that look like them and that haven't assimilated and they can relate to. So I think it's another example of how we can think of our work differently. Framing matters. So as maybe some of you know, maybe not all of you know, the Romanian migrant family that died in Akwesasni was not Romanian. They were Romani, which is where I'm coming from. And it's a marginalized community. And so I wanted to talk about how framing can definitely change the narrative. So this is a story on this side. That's my left. That was covered by the Toronto Star, by an immigration reporter. And that's not to accuse him, but the story was talking about, the immigration journey of this family, the fact that they went to the United States and they tried to come back. And the framing was essentially looking at the portrayal of Romani people quite negative, right? Not really thinking about what were these people facing, but really what did they do? And so I wrote a story with two of my colleagues about what is the situation of Romani people and why would Romani people risk their lives to go through an Akwesasni River legally, right? Not to go back to Romania. And then we also asked the family what their concerns are, and their main concern was getting the bodies back to Romania. So we focused on that, and then we focused on anti-Romani racism that the Roma community still faces today. This is another story that we've done. When Amira Al-Gawabi was nominated, a lot of the coverage was indeed, again, very harmful, focusing on the fact that she said that Quebecers are, she was saying that she had an anti-Quebecer speech, right? Because she was talking about Quebec and what's going on with Law 21 and criticizing it. And then meanwhile, we wrote a story just asking Muslim women how they felt that week and how hard it was for them, because we've heard from many women that it was a very harmful week, and then how they dealt with this. So I'll end it here. I had a recipe for service journalism, but I don't know if I can get into it. But basically, it's be a servant to your audience, basically the people who write the stories matter. So the whole, theory about the lion versus the hunters, think about cultural competence, do more storytelling, less opinion, reporting on the ground, focus on the system, not the symptoms. Make sure your story really serves the community you're covering, humanize them, train people from the communities to write about their communities and trust them, not write with the community and not about them, and consult the community before, during, and after, emphasize on the context, build relationship based on trust, be consistent, and show care. Finally, I'll just leave you with a few words. That's it. There's another one. Just go in your story with care and worry about the harm you may cause. That's it.
Thank you, Leila. Next, we'll hear from Andre Goulet, Executive Director of the Harbinger Media Network, a cross-country progressive podcast community. He's host of the long-running podcasts Unpacking the News and The Korea File. He's also audio producer at Quebec Solidarity Journalism Cooperative Pivot and the independent journalism outlet The Breach Media, former broadcast coordinator at Concordia's Community University Television, and producer for dozens of podcasts. So welcome, Andre.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks, Magda. And thank you to everybody for the really exciting ways of interrogating what we're talking about here at the workshop today. And obviously, I don't have issues with inclusion because I'm a white dude. And so one of the things with Harbinger, when we launched a couple years ago, was trying to create a space where, like, podcasts have a cliche of being kind of white guys talking. So we wanted to change that. It did start off with kind of a community of like 20 shows that was maybe not that inclusive or representative, but over the last couple of years, it's really evolved into something different. And in my role as director of the community, that's like the priority all the time, is trying to really find voices that we don't see in mainstream media. Magda, can you go to the slide of the map just to kind of give a sense of the vastness? We're 53 shows across the country, 100 hosts. Almost everyone's a journalist, an academic, or an activist. So we're bringing a very professional perspective on like the stories we read in the news. Some of it's hard news, some of it's more just interview-based and telling personal stories, but it's very rarely the like two guys talking and joking kind of cliche. So next slide, please. It's been really fun over the last 2.5 years since we launched to have it now become a community where I crunched the numbers last year and we released 469 episodes, which is wild, where it's really high quality stuff. And I guess because we deliberately tried to create space for lots of voices, The Breach Show has Pam Palmater and Elle Jones. Desmond Cole and Shama Rangwala host a show called Replay, which is pop culture and racial capitalism. These aren't the sort of shows that probably get greenlit in a CBC boardroom, like, even though the CBC does a lot of really good work. So really Harbinger is there to create spaces where people who can speak professionally about the world around them, the lived experience, can have a community that supports them, right? One other thing that has kind of taken off in the last 1.5 years is we are partnered with lots of independent journalism spaces like Press Progress, like The Breach, our friends at Pivot, who are the Solidarity Journalism Cooperative in Quebec, the Maple in Calgary, the Independent in St. John's, Newfoundland. We're a space where all these different journalists, all these different activists and academics can kind of be friends and support each other. So weirdly, it's actually been really successful, and we get about 100,000 downloads a month, which is by podcast standards like pretty good. And so the goal as we move forward is how do we continue to create an inclusive space in terms of identity and stuff like that, but importantly, also in terms of things like class and in terms like not ideology, but we have a problem with the far right in Canada and all around the world these days. So we're creating a space where conversations like that can happen, where we don't just have to be like the balanced, neutral journalism, which I get it, but sometimes it's like reality is biased. So we really are a space that is having conversations, challenging narratives that aren't challenged in the mainstream. So obviously, media consolidation has really weakened the landscape of media in this country. We're a space where we're trying to give voices to people, not just to sit in their basement, cliche, like have a podcast, but to professionally have conversations and then try to make it like popular around the country. So I'm really looking forward to getting to speak with some of you in our workshop and exploring some of these ideas. And this is awesome. Thanks a lot for organizing it.
Awesome. Maybe we can just do a round of applause for all the panels. That was amazing, guys. Thanks so much. I'm just delighted to be in everyone's presence. And so now we're going to move to the breakout discussion groups. Thanks for that. Each of the panelists will facilitate one kind of breakout discussion with the goal of addressing one question and coming up with recommendations for how the media can do better. Just to kind of keep things focused, we were envisioning, how can the media in Montreal do a better job than they are now? And so I will kind of tell you what question each of the panelists will be tackling and where in the room they'll be. So listen for which question is most interesting to you. And then once I'm done reading through all of them, feel free to follow your panelists to wherever they're headed. And I'm happy to, we probably should have had a way to project the questions, but I'm happy to help guide you if you forget which question or where to go. So Nantali, we'll put you in this corner over here, discussing how we can create a truly inclusive journalistic workplace. So folks who are interested in that question can follow Nantali there. Nagiset, we'll ask you to go over there, discussing how can journalists develop relationships with communities to amplify underrepresented voices. Layla will ask you to head also kind of, we'll raise the screen up. So there's two kind of stations back there to talk about the role of BIPOC-led media in the conversation. Stephen will ask you to head towards the doors there to talk about how can journalists be encouraged to tell a broader range of stories on underrepresented communities. And Andre will ask you to stay here to discuss how can we diversify news content, especially perspectives in the media. And so we'll work in the breakout groups until about 4 o'clock. With the goal, again, of coming up with recommendations for how the media can do better. And then we'll come back together as a group to kind of share what recommendations each group came up with and talk about next steps. So I'm happy to kind of go over what the questions were for anyone who needs that. And we'll look forward to meeting back with everyone at 4 o'clock. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for our slight technical difficulties here. It was amazing for us walking around, hearing the really incredible, thoughtful discussions that were happening about journalism and about communities, and just like all the things that I nerd out on all the time. So, so really great that you guys were able to share your thoughts and come up with recommendations. So what we've done is just grabbed the recommendations and some of the gems that each group wanted to share with the whole group. And so we'll start with Layla's group about BIPOC-led media. Can you just walk us through what you guys came up with and what you wanted to share with the group?
Maybe I'll let Amina, if I mess this up, I'll let the people in my table make it better. Basically, we talked about the 4 questions that I addressed. So like before jumping in the story, think about its purpose and who we're trying to serve, and ask the 4 questions. Support BIPOC-led media initiatives monetarily, obviously. And then the other thing I thought was interesting was making journalism entry awards free for BIPOC-led media, but also make education accessible, train people in the community. If you're on a journalism committee or editorial board, make sure at least one BIPOC-led media makes it to the finals. So whether it is an award or anything, a fund or whatever that you're sitting on, and then recognize that other mainstream media or also independent media are white-led and have colonial histories. And I think that will allow you to better understand the role of BIPOC-led media and educate yourself about this reality. Be conscious about it when you're making choices so that BIPOC folks are allowed to wade in. That's pretty much it. Is there anything I didn't talk about? You want guys? No? Okay.
Sure. Well, I actually was really excited by the way my group was thinking about this question, because we ultimately really had issue with the word inclusive and inclusion in general. At the very end, just before we met, we kind of reordered our thinking here, but the big questions that we looked at can we really have an inclusive journalistic newsroom if we don't have inclusive society and culture to begin with? And so we really figure we have to start with understand where we're coming from more than thinking about a journalist representative to each community. How is this a bigger issue? Context analysis is important. Are we talking about a place that still perpetuates systemic racism? So if the society that we're living in isn't really reflecting any kind of attempts at inclusion, can we successfully have inclusive newsrooms? And the reason why that I was excited about this is that I think even in our newsrooms today, we are so probably ridden with guilt that we really want to get the answer right as to what an inclusive newsroom looks like. So we look for the solutions right away that we think are get diversity in the room and make sure you go and you talk to certain people and ask. I mean, I don't know that we do enough in terms of how we ask questions, but we talk about what looks like addressing just the symptoms, but we rarely look at the broader societal questions. And that leads to our second point, which is analyze our society, look at data, inclusive education in journalism. One of the people in our group was talking about how change in journalism school is going to be key in how we change newsrooms, which is an obvious thing because this is the training ground for who's coming into the newsrooms, whatever the newsrooms, large, big or small. If the makeup of faculty is not diverse, and that makeup will affect how people are taught, not just who's teaching them, but what they're teaching them and how they're teaching them, that will affect how people learn. And so that's going to be a change that has to happen before and while we're trying to make inclusive newsrooms better. So then we decide, okay, let's say hypothetically we can get to some kind of a semblance of an inclusive newsroom. If we're in that space, what does that space need to be? One thing that was key is that journalists and the people working the space need to be open. Inclusion has to be about being humble and being able to take feedback and criticism from the broader community. And that means actually sort of sitting with the discomfort if you're going to talk to people who are going to say, well, you've never done a good job about talking about my reality or my community's reality. Whatever that community is, I think we've talked a lot about certain words becoming synonymous with other words. So inclusion, diversity becoming synonymous with race. I know for myself at CBC, I was very concerned that inclusion was synonymous with Blackness, because we've only had this conversation around inclusion in this context post George Floyd. So it's like it's only a racism thing, whereas we've have a perfect example that inclusion addresses anybody who's not who's been marginalized, who's been included from the mainstream narrative, whatever that is. So journalists also need to hold themselves accountable to the work and not assume that because they went to said community to talk to said people, they did the good work because they were there. The perception from the people in my group, which was quite encouraging, is that they're observing our media outlets and observing that our media outlets are still failing at these questions, that they're still patting themselves on the back a little bit too much about being out in certain communities and neighborhoods and telling certain stories, and not humbling themselves enough. And so if you're open to criticism, then it'll go to our next point, which is be open to learning and having to constantly work on that openness in our journalism and get better at it. And what that colleague in the group was saying was also understanding that we are part of a shifting society and a shifting culture. And therefore, as journalists, you have to actually be prepared, especially old journalists and old journalists older than me, who've been doing the work for longer than me, have to be prepared to understand that the way that we've operated 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago for some people is not the way anymore. It was flawed then, and therefore it is flawed now. And then I just raise a bigger question to the group is the inclusive newsroom actually achievable in the current landscape of the society that we live in? Because ultimately what inclusive newsroom is going to have to face off with is business, eyeballs, marketing, and how we handle that business. So we acknowledge that a lot of this conversation is idealistic, and it will take some time, that there are small steps, but that getting to an inclusive newsroom is going to take a while and requires shifts in many other spheres than just the practice of news gathering and storytelling.
Thank you. Can I see from here? Yes. Okay. So we had one main question with our group, and I want to thank all the members of the group that we discussed. We had many encouraging discussions, and they are really aware that there is issues to be discussed about when it comes to inclusive media. So it was really a good and challenging conversation. It was fun. So thank you to all of you guys. How can we encourage journalists to tell a broader range of stories on underrepresented communities? I'll just have to move because I can't see right, and there's no way I can see that small screen there. The first one would be to increase diversity in newsroom, have more people with disabilities in media, whether it's executive or in newsroom or staff. And also listen to and incorporate underrepresented perspectives. One of the discussions was about you might have a story, but if you don't have the right angle, you don't have the right words, you don't have the right focus on the story, you might cause more harm than good by not doing it right. And part of that is also to avoid stereotypes. I was talking about choosing the right words, the right angles. It's part of that, especially when it comes to handicapped persons. And also focus on systemic issues, systemic barriers to getting diagnosis and mobility issues also. And we've talked about increased diversity in newsroom, but obviously if you don't have workspaces that are free of physical barriers, then you're besides the point. And the last one, I'm sorry, I have to move again. I'm sorry, it's okay. Increase accessibility and also think about work from home options, because with Zoom, Teams, what have you, you can create stories from your home, which is great for handicapped persons, and again make accessible workplaces. Or work from home issues that work from home technologies that can make things better. So that was our main discussions, and thank you very much for the opportunities, and thank you to every one of you.
Oh, me? Hi. So I get asked to speak a lot, and I'm a little tired. So I asked one of my group members to come and speak instead, so you can be on camera. Come on up. Come on up. We'll change seats.
Hello. Okay, so in our group, we discussed regularly spotlighting communities, specifically focusing on more positive stories, because as Nagisa discussed, oftentimes it's very negative, very heavy, showing up for cultural events and just being in the community, not always for, work, journalism purposes, just in your personal time. Cultural awareness programs and training in journalism schools, implementing those. I'd go further to say, in workplaces, in newsrooms, and I think Christy has done lots of work like that at the CBC. More teamwork in newsrooms. Nakasset shared a few stories where some of the issues that popped up came about because of a lack of cohesion amongst different people who work in the newsroom. So editors, journalists, photographers. So working on that, which is kind of a symptom of, the fast pace of newsrooms, unfortunately. More ethics training and review for managers, and regularly checking your own biases and fragility. And that was what we came away with.
Sorry.
Thank you. That was awesome. And our topic was how can we diversify news content, especially perspectives in the media. And I want to just highlight that one of the funnest things about talking to journalism students and other journalists is that we're all such huge nerds about like all the same things. So it's really exciting to just like unpack all the different questions that we explored. So why does Canadian media fail to report a diversity of perspectives? The things that we touched on I thought were interesting. The legacy aspect of having like old people, like really old people in positions of authority. And the traditional Western view of journalism, which can clash with like broadly more cultures. And the audience itself, because lots of people are low information or no information people. They don't really care, either because they don't have to, or because life is a challenge and we don't have time, right? So how media sometimes doesn't do its job because it doesn't have an audience that is there for it, if that makes sense. Problems that are systemic, how can journalists make a difference and do better? What we came to I thought was really interesting, which is that empathy is not really taught in J school, according to my group, but it's actually a really key thing for being able to explore why stories matter and who are the people behind the stories. So yeah, I think empathy was one of the big things that we thought could be something that journalists could do to challenge. And especially when we're looking at disinformation, fake news, and social polarization, even empathizing with a fascist is kind of key because you have to know why, and that helps us to unpack like historical stuff. So empathy is a way to also address, if not immediately change, social polarization and the way people are siloed in their own YouTube algorithms and stuff like that. It's a super long game, but it's necessary to have empathy. And how do we as a society avoid becoming entrenched? The group struck on a few things. Education is key, both as a journalist, seeing yourself as an educator, not just a reporter, but then also in school, critical thinking skills are key, whether it's teenagers or whether it's people actually in J school learning how to like approach everything critically. Once again, empathy and media literacy, which is part of critical thinking too. Finally, news organizations that we can look at as modeling good sort of new media behavior. La Converse would be one, Pivot would be another, and The Rover, which does really excellent Montreal-based reporting, is just very human journalism. So we had a lot of fun, and thank you so much for the opportunity to bring us all together.
Amazing. Thanks so much, you guys. This has been so inspiring and humbling for me as a journalism instructor as well. And I appreciate the call outs to journalism schools. I took lots of notes from everyone's group about what journalism education can do better. The conversation doesn't end here for us, for our panelists, and we hope for you guys as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to?
Just thank you so much, and hopefully this is useful, and so much that we've learned here. Thank you all for being here. Just fantastic, and so much to think about going forward. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we're excited to keep the conversation going. Thanks to all the participants as well.
In my class, you're free.
All right, well, I guess that's a wrap for the folks on Zoom. I'll just say thank you so much for being in that space. We did see a few comments in the chat, and we've had a chance to read them here in the space. We popped them up, so thank you, Julie, for example, for participating with your ideas. Appreciate it. And we're going to close up the Zoom now. We wish you a very great weekend and afternoon, and thanks for joining us virtually for the space. Looking forward to seeing you next time on our channel. Bye. Take good care.